Hello and welcome. I hope things are going well for you and that you're enjoying learning more about these regional coffees and how they can taste different and where they're grown and how it changes the area that it's in. Today we're looking at Asian coffees. We left Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, and now we're headed over into India, and Indonesia, Vietnam, and Papua New Guinea. So please make sure that you read your book, and as you're studying, augment, all three of these should go together, the PowerPoint, the Integrity Lecture, and the readings in the chapter. So make sure that you go ahead and do that this time around. Make sure that you make flashcards. PowerPoints can be really good friends, but you also of yours, but you also need to make sure that you listen to the Integrity Lecture and that you also read the book, because a lot of the information that I give to you on the PowerPoint Integrity is new information that's not in your textbook. So, I'm not going to regurgitate a lot of what's in your textbook already. Sometimes I do that with a section or two, but for the most part I don't. So let's go ahead and move on to Asian coffees. The first one we're going to hit here is India. India is not well known for great coffee in the United States. There's a couple of exceptions, and we're going to talk about that. It's a coffee that a lot of it is kept in the continent of India, and most Americans are not don't find Indian coffee very quaffable. So some is exported. Don't get me wrong, there are ways to export it. But as you're looking at coffees that are out there, a lot of these coffees from India are very inexpensive coffees and might be under $6 a pound, for instance. India does have both Robusta and Arabica beans, so both levels of beans, so the higher quality and the lesser quality. Remember, Robusta is grown at lower levels, Arabica at higher levels. Robusta is less, resistant to disease. It's a more hardy, but not as good kind of coffee. Most of what you have in India is going to be lower grade coffee, and when comparing it again to other coffees and coffee regions, a lot of people in America that are into specialty coffees tend to pass on Indian coffees, but there are a couple of cool ones we'll be talking about to you. The best quality Indian coffee that's out there has really a very unique spicy flavor to it, and by spices I mean Indian spices. So nutmeg, clove, cardamom, pepper. Those are all, you can smell that aroma and you can taste it when you get some really high-end specialty coffees. Now, and not to offend anybody, in every region in the world you can get high-end, nice specialty coffees. So don't be offended. It's just, for the most part, what do they produce? And they're producing coffees that are not of great grade. They're more of what we would consider, when in comparing it with other countries' coffee, a lower grade of coffee. They do have, here's a picture right here of India, and as you can see, we've got Nepal and China and Pakistan right in through here. Most coffee is going to be grown in this southern region. As you get further up north, you're not going to find that many areas that would be even suitable to grow coffee. But near Calcutta, right in through here, is where some great coffee growing regions are. And again, what you're going to want to look for in Indian coffee to get a better quality is something that says estate or single origin or single lot coffee, and also kind of go on and do some research, ask around about that. And if you're going to be getting something that's around $5 or $6 a pound, it's not what the American coffee trade would be considering a specialty type of coffee. One of the cool things they do have, and I highly recommend that you try, is called monsooned coffees. Monsooned coffees. So right here you see monsooned Malabar, and you see India, Malabar coast of Karnataka right there. And you can kind of see it's a full city roast, full-bodied with no acidity, syrupy chocolate taste, aged pale yellow. We're going to talk about that in just a minute. In monsoon winds, and it's extremely mellow. And part of what you see on a label, whether it's wine or coffee or I don't know, Little Debbie Swiss cakes, is marketing. But there should be some truth to what they're saying there. What happens with these monsoon coffees is they go ahead and pick these coffees. They store them in a warehouse for 3 to 4 months, and then what they do is they, during that 3 to 4 months, they actually expose them to the sea air. They open up the doors of these warehouses and allow the winds to blow through. That's close to the coast, and so that sea air, the cherries are exposed to the sea air and this high humidity of the monsoon season. They actually age these. They pick them right before monsoon season, and they age them during the monsoon season, which is really cool. And what happens is they they don't process them at all. They pick these cherries, they lay them out, and they have at it kind of thing. And basically, what happens is the outside starts to rot off, and they turn a yellow color to them, and they're very, very cool, very, very neat. There are a couple of different regions that do the monsoon coffee, and I highly recommend you try that out, see if you like it or not. It's kind of a little bit different. India was introduced to coffee in 1670, and this is kind of a character sketch. I don't know how close the real thing is to what he looked like, but it was Saint Baba Budan. And he was a Islamic cleric. He was a Sufi Muslim. We've already talked about that from Africa and Arabia. He was on a pilgrimage to Mecca, and as he was doing this, he traveled through Mocha, Yemen. And as we remember, that's the port that used to export all of the coffee beans and a lot of coffee, areas that would be growing regions or around that area, and it would be definitely makes sense that as he was on his pilgrimage, he would pass through there. He absolutely loved coffee. He drank it all the time. He thought it was wonderful. He certainly was not one of these Muslim clerics that wanted to ban it. But what he did was he taped to his belly 7 coffee beans, and he smuggled them out as he went to Mecca, and then as he came back through, and he was traveling back through to his homeland, India, he actually taped 7 beans to his belly. He went back to India. He planted them and started a large, his monastery was very effective in spreading the plant and seedlings and growing coffee, etc. And then it just kind of went from there. India it was the 3rd region to grow coffee. So if we remember our history, Ethiopia was the first. It's the birthplace or the cradle of coffee. And then Yemen was the next place. And then India is going to be the 3rd region to actually grow coffee. Kind of going back into our history, remember that Yemen was the first country to actually commercially export coffee. It's kind of a neat story, and this guy looks very interesting and fun, and like he likes his coffee. I wanted to go ahead and do a repeat too of coffee flavors of the world, and I'm not going to talk about Indian coffee, but if you did think of Indian coffee, hopefully you would think of not talking about the monsoon coffee, but of the normal coffee coming from India, average coffee coming from India, those Indian spices that you would see, cardamom, etc. So let's go back to Central America. We've got a nutty chocolate taste in Central America. It's pretty easy to remember because a lot of nuts and chocolate are grown in Mexico. In Africa, we've got the fruit. We've got that blueberry, lemon, and wine or winey type of aroma and flavor. And as we move over into Indonesia, we're looking at that earthiness and mushrooms, smoked leaves, smokiness, the leaves in the forest floor, etc. So it's pretty much what we're looking at there. In Indonesia, let's go ahead and go through with Indonesia here. We've got, again, earthiness with a full range of flavors. Autumn leaves, and there's stuff that you can hear like, oh, it's like leaves on the forest floor, the aroma that would have. Wood smoke, wild mushrooms. One of the YouTubes I would like for you to go ahead and click into is the one that's listed right here. I'm not going to show it right now, but I do want you to click at as you are going through your PowerPoints and studying here. And it talks about the Kopi Luwak. It can sell for up to $350 a pound. Just like anything, there's a lot of ripoffs or versions that are not real. But basically what happens is this cat that you see right in here that's eating these cherries, is a civet. It's a type of animal, and what happens is this animal goes ahead and eats the coffee cherries, and it passes through its intestines, comes out the other end, and they take this coffee bean at that point, after it's considered excrement. They clean it up, obviously, and roast it, and there would be no issues with, you know, some kind of disease or anything like that because of all the processing the bean goes through at that point. But apparently the acid in the stomach and intestine that the civet has is really kind of changes the flavor of it. So watch this YouTube. You can find out some more information about it. But it's the Kopi Luwak. It goes for $350 a pound. It is very, very expensive. A lot of companies may do some kind of fundraising. So, for instance, there was a large department store that is very high-end in the UK, and they got in Kopi Luwak, and what they did was they charged $50 a cup for it, and they have like a dining room for lunch and dinner. And if you bought that coffee, then all the proceeds would go to charity. So it's kind of been a fun thing that people have done in the past. And buying one cup at $50 is a lot better than buying a pound at $350, although you could get a lot more cups of coffee out of it, obviously. I don't know. Maybe everybody in the class should go together and get some. I don't know. But I've not ever had this. Bennett Lucky Goat kind of, as does other coffee aficionados, kind of think it's like, you know, a bunch of vodka. They don't agree with it. One of the kind of sad things for this civet that they have, this animal that's here, is they used to do this in the wild, but it's become so popularized and so much money for doing this that people have captured these animals, caged them, and so they're, you know, sitting there being stuffed with these coffee beans all the time, and they're considered, you know, a real moneymaker, and I just find that very unfortunate. But look at it; it's very interesting and different. There are several thousand islands in Indonesia, and obviously all of them don't produce coffee. About 12 of them do, and we're only going to talk about 3 of them, and I would like for you to go back into your book and look more into this. But the first one is Sumatra, and Sumatra is the island or Isle of Gold. A lot of coffee specialists don't consider their coffee to be golden, but Sumatra coffee is, you know, there's a lot of bad stuff that's out there. Part of that is the roasting process here once it hits the United States, and then the brewing process. So, you know, you can get some very, very good Sumatras that are out there, but there is a lot. Sumatra does the wet hull method, and we'll talk more about that down the road, but not today. There's lots going on with class already today. Java was the first island to go ahead and grow coffee, and it's probably one of the most famous ones in the U.S. at least for growing coffee. And then the last one that you have here is the Sulawesi. So these are the 3 regions there that are main. Obviously, there's other ones, and they are the 3 best regions for growing coffee, and they're different islands in and of themselves. These are some pictures right here of Sumatra, and so we've got some, you know, pictures of these high altitudes that they have. Someone in the fields picking, or the plantation picking, and just another tree right there. Sulawesi right here is kind of interesting. This is a very interesting island if you take a look at this, and you can kind of see how far it is from Australia. We're going to be going over to Papua New Guinea, and you can see how Papua New Guinea is fairly close there. And then the Philippines are not too far away. Another kind of ripoff of the coffee, the expensive coffee we were talking about, the Kopi, is that the Philippine islanders have gone and started producing these, and apparently they don't, this type of coffee, it doesn't taste near as well. So look at make sure it's Indonesian and not Filipino. Sulawesis can be very, very good coffees. They can be the jewels of Indonesia. One of the cool things is they use these older Typica cultivars. So again, their varietal is going to be a Typica. They actually, this area is very, very old. It's very ancient land. They've had people living in this on this island for a long, long period of time. And as such, these coffee plants are very old, and the DNA strands that they come, that are there are considered very old. And I'm going to show you a little bit more about these unique houses and a better picture of it. We've got somebody very laborious, process where she's sorting these beans, and just kind of a look at some of the different lands there. Sulawesi, I told you I'd show you a better picture of these houses. They actually are an ancient people, and they, have, obviously you can see a motorcycle, and there's some industrialization, etc. But they are very simple people, and they live in these very traditional, really kind of cool houses, if you ask me. They've actually made a great tourism business through opening these up to tourists and having people go. So go to Sulawesi in Indonesia if you have a lot of money one day. It'd be that kind of nice. All of their beans are Arabica. We already saw that the basic varietal is going to be Typica. They have a region that's mountainous right here. So you can kind of see this unique shape to this island, and how it kind of, I don't know, it looks almost like a puzzle piece or something like that. Most of the coffee is grown here in the southwest portion of Sulawesi. Tanah Toraja is actually this best region, Tanah Toraja, right in through here. It's a very mountainous area, and that's considered the best region within this island. Because it is such an ancient land formation, it has a high iron content to it. It's not dangerous, it certainly isn't going to give you iron poisoning or anything like that, but it definitely gives a different flavor to the coffee. So if you can get a Tanah Toraja Sulawesi, I would suggest it very much. Nutty, warm, spicy, cinnamon, cardamom kind of flavor to it. And again, that one's going to be extremely unique because of the iron content of the soil. In Indonesia, most is dried processed. There is some wet processed, but most of it is dry processed. I'm sorry, most Indonesian coffee is dry processed. The Dutch colonists brought coffee to Indonesia, and they basically used this to kind of catapult them into the world's largest production at the time. So in 1698, they used to lead the world's production in coffee and exportation of coffee and production of coffee. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. But this is all of Indonesia. And, so we're taking these 12 islands. And the Dutch are very industrious, very hardworking people culturally. And when they went in, they worked and cultivated these farms. Because Dutch settlers settled in, as you remember, hopefully from your history, when the Dutch would land somewhere, they would do a couple of things. One would be they would trade. And that was great, and boats would go back and forth. But eventually they started to colonize, and lots of people would come and settle. And because of that, the farms in Indonesia are usually 1 to 2 acre farms. There are a few state-run farms that are larger than this, but not very many. It's a handful of farms. Currently, Indonesia is the 3rd largest producer of coffee. We know Brazil is the first, and I hope you go back and remember what the second one is, so you'll need to know those and in order. Indonesian coffee, just in general, is rich, full-bodied, and mildly acidic. It is that earthy, mushroomy, oftentimes tobacco is another term that's used to describe Indonesian coffees. So, remember that, so that if I were to put you in a grocery store and I gave you 4 or 5 different areas of coffee, what you could kind of guess without, just knowing the location, what kind of coffee taste you might have or aromas you might have. They do have in Indonesia, again, as we've talked about, some really fine aged coffees. Now, you don't age coffee, right? I mean, it's kind of like a misnomer. It's like, wait a minute, we don't age coffee. We go ahead and pick them and start processing them, except for the monsoon that you just learned about. But actually, in Indonesia, they do actually age some coffees. And what they found is that they can put these coffee beans in warm Indonesian climate, and they will leave them again for 3 or 4 months, and then they have this deeper body to them, a really rich, heavier body to them. So remember, we talked about body, like the difference between skim milk, and as it goes up, 2%, 1% and 2%, and then whole milk, and then half and half, and then full cream. And this would be the richest, fullest bodied that you could get. And it's a less acidic. So it might be something, and again, Americans typically don't like acidity. So this might be something that would, you would enjoy. So again, that monsoon coffee is one of the types of aged coffee that they have in Indonesia, and it's very, very interesting and different that they have there. But they also have some other aged types of coffees where they take these beans and age them in a warehouse, and it gives a very different flavor and color to the bean. 90% of the crop in Indonesia is Robusta, so that means about 10% is Arabica, and that's not unusual worldwide. Their specialty Arabica and their aged coffee. Now, the aged coffee is going to be Arabica, but taking all of the Arabica, of which some of that is aged, it's due to the climate that they have that. I think I'm stumbling here for a second and not getting to the point, so I apologize. With that specialty Arabica, all of that is Arabica bean, obviously, very high end. Some of that Arabica bean is aged. I did want to tell you a little bit about the aged coffee bean that they do, the processing that they do. I'm not going to talk about it, but it's not a past crop. When I talk about an aged coffee from, and I'll just grab a country, Costa Rica, Jamaica, Hawaii, whatever you want to call it, and it's sat in the warehouse too long, it's called past crop, and it's not good. People don't buy it. It's your junk coffee, so to speak. But in Indonesia, they have a coffee that they do age. It's due to the climate that they can age this coffee, and it's really, really emphasizes spicy and earthy notes. It's very different. If you taste one, you'll never forget it, kind of thing. You have more emphasis of cedar, tobacco, oriental spices, and again, this decreased acidity. Let's go to Vietnam. In Vietnam, there is a lot of coffee production, believe it or not. They do a whole lot of coffee production in Vietnam. It's one of the world's largest producers, not 1, 2, or 3, but it's really a large producer there of coffee. What happened there was the French missionaries came, Catholic French missionaries came in 1850s, and they brought the bourbon varietal with them to grow. And it has thrived in Vietnam and done very, very well, especially around the Tonkin region. So Tonkin, that's the region where coffee tastes best and grows best. They do have Robusta on smaller plantations. They're about half of the country where there's coffee growing is Robusta, and the other half is going to be Arabica. Again, looking at that bourbon varietal, the best of which is around Tonkin, Vietnam. Again, the Robusta is going to be on these smaller plantations. It's going to be about half of the country that's a Robusta. There's a light acidity, and it's really good for blending. Their Robusta bean is very good for blending in with an espresso blend. Papua New Guinea is very interesting country, and I wanted to spend a little bit more time on it. I think probably some of these countries you've heard more about, but maybe not so much about Papua New Guinea. But you can see again with our map, Papua New Guinea's on an island, and half of that island is Papua New Guinea. And it's fairly close to Australia. It's, again, an island or part of an island there. They do wet process for their coffee. In 1927, Jamaican Blue Mountain seedlings were taken to Papua New Guinea to see if coffee would grow there. So one of the later countries to get seedlings to start growing, and it actually took off very, very well. They have really high elevation, what they call high elevation swamps, swampy areas, but they're very highly elevated, and they are as high as 5,000–6,000 feet. So the coffee's growing at very good climate for this. The Blue Mountain seedlings that are in Papua New Guinea produce much better Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee than Jamaica does. It's kind of a sad scenario, but that's the case there. Again, I've got a large map of the world and where Papua New Guinea is and how big it is, and then a larger map of the area here. Papua New Guinea only does 1% of the world's production, so not a lot of coffee comes from Papua New Guinea. But what they do have there is really pungent mango, papaya, and fruitiness. So it might be kind of fun to try a coffee from Papua New Guinea and see what you think, and if you can pick those fruit-forward flavors out. They say that the specialists term Papua New Guinea coffee as perfectly balanced, clean, full-bodied. There are two major famous plantations, coffee plantations, Sergi and Arona. Papua New Guinea is a very poor country. Not everybody lives like this, but this is very typical. In Papua New Guinea, you would have a farm behind you, and it would be your backyard, that you're growing your coffee in and then taking it to market. That being said, not all coffee is produced that way, but that would be very typical. Here's some coffee beans that are growing, and then here's some children, I'm sure, picking for their family's farm. PNG, Papua New Guinea, is the way it's put. PNG is their marketing label that they put, and it's produced on the eastern half of the island. So let's take a look right here. We're looking at this area right in through here. The eastern half of the island is where you're going to be growing coffees. Okapa is the world-class certified organic coffee. So that, if you saw Okapa on a test, that would be from Papua New Guinea. It would be certified organic, and it would be world-class. It's one of the best organics that you can get out there. One of the things that's interesting, however, is that really a lot of the Okapa that you see is because of the terroir and the elevation. Fertilizers and pesticides are really too expensive and really unattainable in Papua New Guinea. So most of what you see there is pesticide-free, fertilizer-free, etc. They're working with the elements. Now, I know that part of organic means the land, stewardship of the land and crop rotation and those kinds of things. So if that's the portion of certified organic you want, then you want to make sure that you get this Okapa here. One of the things that's interesting about Papua New Guinea coffee is that it's naturally low levels of caffeine and acidity. So if you're kind of caffeine sensitive and you don't want decaf coffee, Papua New Guinea or a PNG might be a good option for you. There's some threats to coffee growing and continuing the coffee industry in Papua New Guinea. Let me show you a few of them. One is a poor infrastructure. So you need, as you see here, these men right here are on, dirt roads. So the roadways are hard. Shipping both by ocean carrier at ports and by, within the country itself, very, very difficult. Buying equipment to process coffee, getting gas to put in your truck to go take workers out to pick, the beans. All of these are very difficult things. A lot of coffee remains unsold. It remains at farms and kind of is consumed or, is past crop and can't be used. They also have some problems with changing the cropping pattern, and that was why I was talking to you about that, depleting the soil, etc., wanting to go ahead and strip it of as much as they can. But also, changing the cropping pattern means as well that a lot of farmers are saying, growing coffee is not, economically sound for us. Let's go ahead and start growing fruits and vegetables. We can eat fruits and vegetables. A lot of these farmers are sustenance farmers and just trying to eke out, staying alive. And so, I've kind of got this picture right here. This would be very typical, market setup where they're growing vegetables. And so, again, if I'm selling these and they don't sell, I have something to feed to my family. If my coffee doesn't sell or I have trouble getting it to market or whatever it might be, it's going to be really hard for my family to live off of coffee. Some other threats are labor shortages. It's really hard to get people to help you to pick your crops. If your family's large enough, that works out great. If it's not, then that's a real hindrance there. They also have 3 diseases that are really prevalent in Papua New Guinea right now. They're so prevalent that the rest of Indonesia is is worried, or Indonesia is worried about it spreading to them. There's already been scares of these three diseases. Coffee berry disease, or CBD, spread of berry boyer is another disease, and pink disease. And so if we have time, I'll go into these later. For right now, you've got enough on your plate to look at this stuff. One of the things I did want to mention to you is that Papua New Guinea, was, I don't know if it's still sold at Trader Joe's, but they had a big marketing plan in 2010 where they sold pea berries. And a lot of the, again, see a medium roast, Papua New Guinea, pea berries, and a lot of the proceeds from this, Trader Joe's, or I shouldn't say a lot, some of the proceeds from this Trader Joe's put back into the Papua New Guinea coffee farmers' hands, not just buying the coffee, but, education for them, additional stuff for them, which was really great. So I'd strongly suggest buying Papua New Guinea coffee and, supporting those farmers that are out there. Again, it may be at Trader Joe's, it may be somewhere else that you can purchase it, and see what you think of the Papua New Guinea coffee. So I think this is, I think that's it, absolutely.